From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
As voters go to the polls in Wyoming and Alaska, is this Liz Cheney's last stand and Sarah Palin's second act? Plus, President Biden signs the Inflation Reduction Act. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues, columnist Kim Strassel and editorial writer Monet Ukwe-Barua. Welcome to you both. Tuesday's Republican primary in Wyoming is one of the most hotly anticipated of the year. But oddly, the result seems to be in little doubt at this point. There's a recent poll by the University of Wyoming that gives Liz Cheney about 28% of the vote and her challenger, Harriet Hageman, about 57% of the vote. So let's listen to these two candidates a little bit. We'll start with Liz Cheney, and this is a piece of her final message to voters from her website.
Like many candidates across this country, my opponents in Wyoming have said that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen. No one who understands our nation's laws, no one with an honest, honorable, genuine commitment to our Constitution would say that. It is a cancer that threatens our great republic. If we do not condemn these lies, if we do not hold those responsible to account, we will be excusing this conduct, and it will become a feature of all elections. America will never be the same.
And here's a piece of Harriet Hageman speaking to a crowd at a rally in May.
We're fed up with the January 6th Commission and those people who think that they can gaslight us. We're fed up with those types of Republicans who work harder to deflect attention from the failures of the current administration than they work to protect us from it. And we're fed up with Liz Cheney.
Kim, what do you make of the choice facing Wyoming voters and the argument that each of these candidates is making?
Well, a couple of things just to know about Wyoming. Least populous state in the nation, but where registered GOP voters outnumber Democrats by 4-1, and where Donald Trump won nearly 70% of the vote. And I think that probably explains that poll that you are seeing. A lot of this has got tied up, obviously, in the January 6th committee. And I think what has frustrated a lot of Wyoming voters, if you talk to them, it's not necessarily that Cheney has been critical of Trump. And I truly believe that if she had voted her conscience and stopped just with her impeachment vote and left it at that this would look a lot different. It'd be a much more competitive race. But a lot of voters have been very offended that she decided to join this committee even after Pelosi had vetoed Kevin McCarthy's picks to it. And then some of the tactics that have come out of the committee, subpoenas for fellow Republicans in the House, the decision to hold these hearings prime time, the optics of her being seen sitting next to prominent Democrats who Republicans have really come to scorn, guys like Adam Schiff. And in light of all that, it doesn't really surprise me that much that this is where we're headed. And by the way, I doubt it surprises Liz Cheney, who seems to be on a little bit of a kamikaze mission.
One interesting dynamic will be that some of Cheney's supporters have been urging Democrats in Wyoming to cross the aisle and vote in the Republican primary so that they can vote for her. But as Kim suggests, there simply aren't enough of them, it seems, to make the difference and save Cheney's seat here. But to the other point Kim makes is that it seems like she has embraced this role, Monet. She's not hedging her rhetoric at all. And one remarkable thing was to watch this ad that her father, former Vice President Dick Cheney, cut that is pulling no punches. Let's listen to a piece of that.
In our nation's 246-year history, there has never been an individual who is a greater threat to our republic than Donald Trump. He tried to steal the last election using lies and violence to keep himself in power after the voters had rejected him. He is a coward. A real man wouldn't lie to his supporters. He lost his election, and he lost big. I know it, he knows it, and deep down, I think most Republicans know it. Lynn and I are so proud of Liz for standing up for the truth, doing what's right, honoring her oath to the Constitution, when so many in our party are too scared to do so.
Monet, to me, it sounds like Liz Cheney has known for a long time that she's not going to win this, but she's been intending to go down swinging.
I think that's right for sure. I mean, from the perspective of political strategy, I think it's important to remember that when Liz Cheney first took her very aggressive anti-Trump stance, that probably was not a political calculation whatsoever. I think she's given the public every reason to believe that she's completely sincere in wanting to hold President Trump accountable for the role that he might have played in the January 6th riot, to participate in the committee because she wants to help to bring some of those details to the surface. I think a lot of Republicans are right to say that she has gone too far by allying with the Democrats to participate in a political assassination that hurts the Republican Party. But nonetheless, when she first decided to go down that road, I think she was doing it because she really believed it was the right thing to do. And she probably didn't anticipate that the political consequences of taking that stance would be as dramatic as they were. Of course, she had seen people like Jeff Flake have their political careers ended by putting themselves at odds with President Trump. But I think that she probably thought the January 6th committee was so lurid that it would be somewhat unifying in the American consciousness, and that there would be a little bit more space for people to take an anti-Trump position on that. But time has kind of proven her wrong about that. But in the context of the primary and her quest to be reelected in Wyoming, I think that by now it's certainly obvious to her that the vast majority of Republican voters in her state don't share her perspective on President Trump and January 6th. But the fact that she has, instead of trying to bridge the gap and say, hey, I've served you faithfully as a conservative Republican for all these years, we might disagree about Trump, but look at my track record here. She's actually leaned into her anti-Trump position and made that the centerpiece of her campaign. I think does prove that she certainly, does not think she's likely to be reelected, and that she probably is kind of positioning herself for what her life is going to look like outside of Congress. And that might be the usual retired politician route of saying, I want to, basically continue to participate in the elite inside the Beltway world and potentially building some alliances here with Democrats and progressives in the media. Or it could be gearing up for some kind of independent third-party run. I think that the odds on that second option would be pretty slim, that she'd be very unlikely to have success there. But who knows, that could be something that she intends to do and potentially become a spoiler in 2024.
Kim, what do you make of that idea? This has been floated in the media, and Liz Cheney has occasionally said things like, I will make that decision when the time comes, which is not a no. If someone asks you if you're running for president in 2024 and you don't say no, then the answer seems to be maybe, I'm thinking about it. Do you think that that's a step that she would potentially take within the Republican Party as an independent, or what would that look like?
It probably is on the table. One thing that she seems to have made pretty clear, which has been reported in the press, that her conversations have revolved around the idea that if she loses this race, that whatever she does next will somehow be committed to continuing her cause of ensuring that Donald Trump is not reelected as president. Now, that could be in a lot of different forms. Some people have talked about running a giant super PAC, for instance, that ran ads against him or supported an opponent of his. Yes, she could potentially make a run herself. Now, that is an enormous endeavor. Not saying that she couldn't do it. She certainly has carved out a name for herself among never-Trumpers, of which there is an organized community, including some prominent people. Then you'd have to choose, yes, do you go head-to-head in a Republican primary? That could be a pretty grueling experience, especially because, as you can see, a lot of members of the Republican Party are still very much Trump advocates. The other road, as you know, it would be an independent bid. But then you have to ask yourself, would Liz Cheney, could she actually act as the role of a spoiler in a general election? A lot of people like to point out that, these elections are so close, a few thousand votes here or there. Maybe, yeah, except for then you also have to look at the kind of people that would vote for her. They'd obviously be people that probably were attracted to her because they somewhat detested Trump anyway. So are these votes that she'd actually be pulling away from him in any way? Or would she instead be splitting votes with a Democrat who was running in the election? That's a harder thing to call, but all of that will probably be factoring into her decision about what she does next.
My last thought on this is if Harriet Hageman does indeed win the nomination, I'll be interested to see how she conducts herself after and if she adjusts her rhetoric at all. So throughout this campaign, she has been a little equivocal on the claims of a stolen election. And that changed earlier this month on August 4th. Here's a report in the Casper Star Tribune. Absolutely, the election was rigged. It was rigged to make sure that President Trump could not get reelected, Hageman said on stage. What happened in 2020 was a travesty. And the newspaper says this was her clearest public stance on the integrity of the presidential election so far. I have two thoughts on that. One is she was already way ahead in the polls by the beginning of August. So if she hadn't taken that kind of a stance so far, it's confusing to me why she felt the need to do it, only a week and a half or two before the actual primary voting. But it does seem to me also, Monet, that there are some candidates who just realize that that is what a lot of Republican voters want to hear. Those are kind of the table stakes in a Republican primary, and we'll have to see how they turn to adjust their rhetoric after they win the nomination.
Right. It is an interesting test case because, as Kim was pointing out, Wyoming is one of the reddest states in the country. President Trump won re-election there with almost 70% of the vote. And so if Harriet Hageman gets the nomination, she certainly won't be under any political pressure to pivot back to the center. We will be seeing basically the message that she wants to run on, the message that she wants to communicate to voters. And it will be interesting to see whether she dialed up the rhetoric on President Trump and came out and said explicitly that the election was stolen, really just to lock up the primary, to distinguish herself as much as possible from Liz Cheney, or whether that's something that she really has become convinced of, and it's a message that she's going to continue to repeat, and whether she would enter Congress as a voice on the inside, continuing to talk about election conspiracy theories. I don't know if any of us know the answer to that question, but it will be something that people should continue to pay attention to, both in that race and with other Republican nominees.